trust your brain. We don't really think about it, but there are some psychological and various other physical things that come into play when we do look at our stamps. And these a couple of things I'll show you have intrigued me recently. So I was looking at eBay, and this stock sheet of straight settlement stamps came up, and I'm interested in that area. And I said, oh, okay, nothing looks great. And I was just about to change to go to the next lot. And then my brain said, just a minute, something really strange going on here. Take a look at that. So I looked at it a little bit more closely, and the image was not particularly good. But I said, well, you know, for the price they're offering, and there's a lot of stamps, probably could sell everything else eventually and make my money back. So I'll buy the thing. So I bought it. And then the lot finally arrived, and this was that wonderful stamp that was up in the upper right corner. Now, right now, looking at it, you know, it's not very easy to see and everything else. So there's a wonderful website I've done a presentation on before. I've published in our newsletter about Retro Reveal. And Retro Reveal, if you know the VLC 6000, this is sort of a poor man's VLC 6. It's a free website. And what you can do, you can put up an image and it will pull the image into various forms, about 50 different ways of looking at it. And every once in a while, you get one of the things that it has been able to process that is really revealing. And here it is. So we can see that it says Falk, comma, and Brahman, and it's Bangkok, and that's my one of my 40-year interests. And there's this nice, funny checkerboard cancellation on there. And then I went to my my archives, and I was able to pull this this composite that I had made over the years from 4 or 5 different stamps of that particular cancellation. So it's Falk, Brahman, and Bedek, Bangkok, Siam. Oh wow, that's really adds to my collection. And there's that nice checkerboard, or some call it what's that other game where you play?
Checkers.
Yes, checkerboard or checkers cancellation. So this brings me to what do you see if you've been collecting an area for many years, and I've been collecting Bangkok for 40 years. It's a bit, when you see a stamp, it's a bit like seeing a face in a crowd. Here's a crowd of people. Are there any faces in there that jump out at you? We'll look at this a little later.
Obama.
Yeah, okay, all right. Come back. Okay, oh, there he is, Obama. Anybody else? Anybody else? Well, it's a cartoon. This is supposed to be
Trudeau.
Yeah, it's supposed to be Trudeau. So, looking at a stamp after, many years of collecting them, I am convinced, and maybe I can get a National Research Council grant to investigate this, that the same part of the brain that recognizes faces in a crowd recognizes stamps and the different things going on with the stamps that we collect. And here's another one. Anything there stick out to you as Canadian collectors?
Oh,
Sixpence.
yeah.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay. So, your brain, because we're Canadians and most of us who collected Canadian stamps, those really jump out at us.
And large queen, 12 and
here's from my collection, here's 5 of those chops that over the 40 years of collecting, I have picked up. And this was the 8-cent rate for a 1/2 ounce letter out of Bangkok at the time, which was a fairly common way of mailing things. Not that these stamps are particularly common, but of the type of stamps used there, these were quite available. And here's this checkerboard, or cancellation. Here it is in nice and red. Here you sort of have a look a little bit more closely, and here, yeah, it's here too. And here is the Singapore. They used to have a date slug in the middle, but it became worn, and after a while they just tossed it out and used the undated. And it looks like this thing's been hit twice with this particular date slug. And I also have a 6 cent with that particular chop, and it also has this really homemade cancellation or obliterator in this case, where they took a piece of cork or a piece of rubber and with a knife or a saw made a temporary cancellation that was used for something like 4 or 5 months. And I have also the straight settlement stamps could be used at Bangkok. And here's one that when I run it through Retro Reveal, I can see it's got that particular chop on it. And here's the one that I just got. And here's the company, Falk, Brahman, and Bedek. Mr. Falk was in Bangkok quite early. I was operating a hotel in 1863 and also a bowling alley. You know, there was no TV at the time, so you had to do something with your evenings in a faraway place. And he was a German firm. And he operated also what was called a report boat. Now, Bangkok is about 40 kilometers up from the mouth of the river, the Chao Phraya River that Bangkok is built on from the ocean. And at the time, the sailing ships would have to wait for high tide to be able to get across what they called the bar. Now, it was a sandbar, not somewhere where you'd go and drink, the bar. So he also operated a report boat that went down and got the mail and got the people and whatever supplies that were critical and brought them back to the city. And he went into partnership with these two other characters, Brahman and Bedek, in 1878. And from the research, I've been able to find that Bedek, Brahman rather, for whatever reason, never found out why, left the firm. So I was going to show this again, but you already picked it out. Here's our friend, Mr. Trudeau, and here's our friend, Mr. Obama in this crowd of people. So you beat me to it. Well, that's fine. Okay, don't always trust your eyes. So if you're a stamp collector and been collecting Canadian stamps for a long, long time, when you see one of these, what you tend to do right away, you tend to say, whoops, I'm going to look right up here. Oh, look at this. What the heck's going on up there? Well, what's going up there is a reentry. Now, our friend Ralph Trimble has a tremendous website. If you're interested in reentries, there's no better website you can go on, and I borrowed this from him. There's a reentry. So we tend to, you know, when we're familiar with a stamp, we tend to go exactly to the point we're interested in, is what I'm saying. But sometimes that cannot be, you know, we can be missing out on something. And here's another stamp that Canadian collectors looking for varieties tend to be very interested in because of these reentries. But is there anything else going on the stamp? You know, if you're interested in those fly speck type things, you only concentrate on that, but you may be missing out on other things. So let's have a little experiment here. This is an interesting diagram. Now, look here. You see a dot here, see a dot here, see a dot here, a dot here. No dots on this line. Dot here, dot here, dot here, dot here. No dots here. Dot here, dot here, dot here, dot here. So let's say this is a stamp, and the re-entry, the thing you're interested in, is here. Now concentrate on that, and in your mind, can you see the other dots without moving your eyes?
No.
No, because your brain is concentrating on that, and your peripheral vision is not capable of having the same concentration as the center of your eye. So if this were a stamp and that's the thing you're always looking for, the other the reentry here or the plate flaw there or the funny marking there, you would miss out on. So what do? Well, what you do is that you look at your stamps, not always in the same way, to sort of allow your brain to go and pick out those other things that might be of interest, and heaven knows might be very, very valuable because they're varieties or they're plate flaws or whatever. But because you're always concentrating on the same spot, you're not seeing. So that's my presentation on some of these brain things that we don't always think about.
I'm going to talk about something completely different. I'm going to talk about modern Canadian postal history, a subject that's dear to my heart. I've picked out a few covers to talk about, and they're all from the Elizabethan era. But I start with a little introduction of collecting Canadian modern stamps and particularly postal history. So Queen Elizabeth ascended to the throne in 1952, and that's when the Elizabethan philatelic era started, and she's still reigning today. So there's a lot of time period there, over 70 years, that you have to collect modern Canadian postal history, and it's so complex and there's so many issues that it's sort of divided into eras by the definitives. So you've got the first three eras are the Karsh, Wilding, and Cameo, which are considered the classical era of Elizabethan philately, and that goes from the early 50s up to 1966. And then you've got the Centennial, which is 67 to 73. And because that was such a relatively long-running issue, and also had a lot of varieties printing, the post office started to get very experimental with phosphorescence and tagging and switching printers and papers and everything. It's a very complex one. So that's a very interesting one to collect. After the Centennial era came the caricature and landscapes from the early 70s to 78. Then came the environmental stamps from 77 to 87. Then you had the artifacts and parliament definitives from 82 to 89. And then the wildlife and architecture series from 87 to 96. And concurrent with that was fruit and flag definitives. And then after 96, it started to go into all those self-adhesive definitives and lots of coils and the scenery of Canada with the flag. And that's the current era we're in. And it's a very challenging one because not a lot has been published about it. But Robin Harris, who has written 9 volumes on these Elizabethan periods that I just mentioned, is working on one for this current definitive series. The postal history of this era is a lot of fun because there's lots of it around. It's abundant, but it is challenging to find really good covers. Some of the challenges are certain rates that were very short-lived, usages of some of the stamps, and finding good destinations for these covers where they were mailed. It's also a thing that's a low-cost alternative to earlies, meaning Victorian era. I'd love to collect large queens, but I'd have to be willing to spend more money than I think I want to at this point in my life. But right now, if you want to have a low-cost thing to work on, Elizabethan postal history, there's not a lot of super expensive stuff in it. And there's a new international FIP sanctioned exhibit category called Modern Philately. And that deals with stamps from 1980 and onwards. And that gives you a lot of scope to do modern studies and do competitive exhibiting with it. The resources that I use for studying postal history of the Elizabethan era, the number one is the BNAP study group called the Elizabethan II Study Group, headed by I forget who the guy is now, but anyways, Robin Harris is the editor of the newsletter called the Corgi Times, and it's a very, very good study group. It's got a lot of members. I believe there might be a few from North Toronto there besides myself, and we encourage exhibiting. We share information, and the Corgi Times is a brilliantly produced thing. Like Robin Harris always produces really good works. To study postal history, of course, you need to know rates, and there's a couple of books on them. I didn't bring images of them to this presentation. I'm just briefly discussing it. There's one book published by a guy named Anthony Warkowitz, and Robert Smith, and it has all the Canadian postal rates up to about 2001, I want to say. And that is a really good general rate book. But for a really specific one, just for the Elizabethan era, that covers all the different postal rates that there are. And believe me, there's not just 3 or 5 or 10 categories. There's dozens and dozens of categories of rates, exotic things like returned key from hotels and library book rates and literature for the blind. These are all very specialized kinds of rates, and they were effective during the Elizabethan time, and they're covered in a 3-volume book published by Andrew Chung, Harry Macomb, the late Harry Macomb, and Hank Narbonne. And these books really, really help. They go from 1952 to 2002. They were published just in the early 2000s, so they only go up to 2002. But those books really help you know the rates and be able to analyze your covers and also make discoveries of some really scarce material, which I'll be showing you some examples of. So enough introduction, let's go to look at some covers. This is a first day cover, so completely philatelic if you start off with just an FDC, but it was actually mailed, and it was mailed to a gentleman in Vienna, Austria. And unfortunately, before it got to him, the gentleman died. So it was returned, and you have the outgoing cancels on April 12th, 1956, which was the first day of issue. You have it arriving in Vienna, and then you have this return marking. And on the back, they give the reason for the return in bilingual German and French. French is the language of the UPU, and so every official postal document or form or label has to have French and 1 or 2 other languages. So in Austria, they use German and French. So it's a very interesting cover because even though it's a first day, it has a story to it. The rate is also interesting because it doesn't really correspond to any existing rates of the period. If it were a 1-ounce letter, it should have been just 6 cents. So it might have been overpaid just because they wanted to get the 2 first day of issue stamps onto it. Or if there was an enclosure and it would weigh more than 1 ounce, like up to 2 ounces, the second rate step would be 4 cents. So then it should have been 10 cents and it would have been underpaid but not caught. So either way, it's got even an interesting rate situation going on there. When I was looking up these stamps in the Unitrade catalog, I try to always see the quantities, and it just blew me away. They printed 51 million each of these stamps. And in that time, in the 50s and 60s, our post office was printing those crazy numbers of stamps. And that's why they're so abundantly available at fraction of their value, of their face value these days, because there's just so many of them around. Nowadays, Canada Post prints a lot smaller quantities, and rightfully so, partly because of a drop in the population of the philatelic market, but also just because it makes more sense to do it in quantities that they're actually going to sell. So there's an interesting modern 1956 cover with commemoratives. Most of the ones I'm showing from now on are going to be definitive frank covers. And I'm going to talk a lot about one of my favorite side subjects in postal history, which is postage due. So this is a cover from 1959. It's actually not a cover. It's a post office document that was used for rural route post deliverers. And they, if there was a shortage that had to be paid by a farmer, they'd have a mailbox, and they could just deal with the postman through the mailbox. So it says, in order to prevent delay, mail bearing insufficient postage has been left in your box. Please use this card to remit the amount due. So apparently the guy left a penny in there, and then the card came back chopped with Ingersoll, Ontario, 1959, to say, yep, you've paid it. Thank you very much. If you think about it, I know in 1959, 1 cent was worth a lot more than it is now. Now it's almost negligible. There's nothing you can buy with 1 cent. But in 1959, 1 cent had a little bit more meaning. But still, if you think of the labor of printing that form, of placing it in the post box and handling it, bringing it back to the post office, applying the postage due stamp, applying the chop, and all the work that goes into collecting 1 cent, it's a kind of unimaginable thing that we wouldn't do that these days anymore. And there's also a mystery to the rate, because postage due, if something is short paid, the penalty is that you pay double the deficiency. So if there's a 1 cent postage due, that tells me there would have been a half-cent deficiency, and they didn't have any half-cent rates in that time. So there's got to be another reason why they wanted 1 cent. It might have been, I don't know, I haven't been able to figure that out. So this little slip of paper, besides being an interesting little artifact of rural route postal history, is also a little bit of a rate mystery. Here's a cover with no stamps on it, but it is got some interest. I acquired this going through a dealer's box at a show, which I'd love to be back at a show where I can go through dealers' boxes, and it's coming, I think, reasonably soon. But Toronto Post Office #2 forward news, that really struck me. What is that? And I really had a hard time finding out till I spoke to my friend Andrew Chung, who's one of the authors of those Elizabethan rate catalogs. And Andrew used to work at the post office and gave me the explanation that's at the foot of this image. So #2 forward news is referring to second-class mail, things like newspapers and periodicals that go outside of Toronto on shift #2, which is the day shift. So at least I had an explanation of what that postmark is, but there's still mysteries to it. Why was it not paid? Because this letter was unpaid. That postmark is saying, okay, it was handled by the post office. They saw it. It's addressed to Simpsons. It didn't have a stamp on it. Why was it not charged postage due? It should have been 4 cents, and with double the deficiency, it would have been charged 8 cents postage due. So that's a mystery. And the other mystery is the Greater Toronto Postal Welfare Association. I tried to Google that, and I asked around to some friends, including Andrew, And nobody's ever heard of the Greater Toronto Postal Welfare Association. So I'm still trying to research that one. If anybody knows, I'd be very interested to find out about it. But anyways, a 1962 cover, very innocuous. I think I got it, you know, for less than $1, but it's got a lot of mystery and a lot of interest to it. We'll get back to some covers with stamps on them. So here's another postage due. There was a very long running rate of 7 cents airmail in Canada. It was started in 1943, back in World War II, and it was a domestic postage airmail rate as well as airmail to the United States. Our currencies were close enough that we shared the same postal rates for a good long period. And that rate was in effect for such a long time that when it went up to 8 cents in July of 1964, a lot of people were so used to the 7 cents, they just franked their letters with 7 cents, as this sender did. And it's a nice rate of franking of the 5 cents Queen's visit and royal visit, and the pair of 1 cent cameo stamps. And it was caught. You see that little circular tax mark, 2 cents. The deficiency was 1 cent, 7 to 8. And so the postage due was 2 cents. There's no evidence of it having been collected in California, but that's very common in postage due. You don't always see that the postage due has been collected. It sometimes is in cash or in different ways, and they very haphazardly put postage due stamps on it. It's one of the things when you're collecting postage due mail specifically, it's haphazard whether you get a postage due stamp put on your mail or not. Another interesting thing, on the back of the cover, there's a Cunard steamship logo. So based on the size of this envelope and that Cunard logo, it seems that the sender was recently on a cruise and picked up some of the stationery from the Cunard line and used that to mail the letter to California. Nice little social history there. Okay, some more postage due, this time going to the UK. A lot of features here. It was mailed from St. John's, Newfoundland in 1976 in August. And the first thing I noticed when I looked at this closely, it's just those two, that pair of 8 cent Queen Elizabeth caricature stamps. But when you look closely, these are coils. So this is a coil pair, which makes it a little bit more interesting. And it's also canceled, a little bit too heavy for my taste, but a very clear reading of the slogan, bilingual, hire a student this summer in St. John's, Newfoundland. So that's a nice thing to have. And so 8 and 8 is 16. And the rate in 1976 for a 1 ounce letter to the UK was 20 cents. So they short dated by 4 cents. And that is indicated by that T marking with the 20 shown as what the correct postage rate should have been, and the 4 showing what the deficiency is. So 16 minus 20 is 4. I mean, 20 minus 16 is 4. So the 4 would be converted to 8 cents for double the deficiency. And then when it got into the UK, there's an official conversion from origin currency to destination currency. And I won't go into the deep details of that, but it ended up that 8 cents would equal 13p in the UK. And there's your 13 key, a pair of 5s and a 2 and a 1 of the beautiful UK postage due stamps. I say beautiful, it's a very subjective thing. I love that issue of UK postage due stamps. Those figures, the way they do the numbers, the 1 and the 5 and the 2, they're just jumping out at you as if they're like a swooshing up. And I just love the color combination. So it's a beautiful thing. And then when you study the timing of this cover, it was mailed on August 18th. It went to Bideford, so in Devon, South England. It would have been via London, of course. And the receiver date is not quite fully distinct, but it's August 20 something. So that's pretty good, from St. John's, Newfoundland, probably via either Toronto or Montreal, or maybe even Halifax. I don't know if they have flights from Halifax to the UK in those days. They do now. But then to London, and then to Bideford in Devon in about a week, maybe 10 days, maybe less. That is pretty good transit time for all the processing they had to do with the postage due part. So very nice little piece of modern postal history. Here's another postage due cover, which shows, again, no evidence of it having been paid. This is a domestic cover from Barrie, Ontario, going to Brampton. And that small claims court in Brampton got a lot of mail that's come into the market. So it's a fun thing to collect. And there's a very interesting rate here. So the sender paid 44 cents to mail this letter. And that would be in 1979. It was for either 4 ounces or 150 grams. It was in that period in 1979 where the rates changed from being calculated by the English system to the metric system. And there was some very short-lived rates. Those English rates were raised at the beginning of 1979 in January. And in April, when they put the metric system in, and Canada Post changed all its postage tariffs from ounces to grams, those rates were only valid for 3 months. So there's a scarce period of rates where you find letters from that time that are very, very interesting. And this is an example of them using the old rate instead of the new rate. The new rate would have made it 56 cents for 150 grams, which meant it was underpaid by 14 cents. And you see the postal clerks here that discovered the deficiency marked the correct rate of 56, what it should have been, and then put the double deficiency, 14 cents. So 56 minus 42 is 14. So that's the deficiency times 2 is 28 cents. So it was all perfectly correctly handled by the post office until it got to Brampton, and we don't know if that was collected or not. It likely was, because often what would happen is that for businesses or institutions that get a lot of mail, the postage due mail would be accumulated and they paid one bulk postage due charge. So that's probably why there's no postage due stamps or evidence of it being collected on this cover. And we have another one that came to the small claims court in Brampton, and this one from Milton. And this is something that happens when you collect postal history. It doesn't matter what period, old, new, modern, any period, you end up with covers that you cannot figure out the rate. I can't tell you how many Hong Kong covers I have where the rate doesn't make sense and it's just a mystery. And that's what this cover is. They paid 44 cents in Milton to mail this in 1980. And there's no rate. And I believe me, I scoured Andrew Chung's book for a long time to try to find some kind of rate that would make sense. But it would have been either overpaid for 38 cents if it were 100 up to 100 grams, between 50 and 100 grams. That would have been an overpayment. But if it were 150 grams, between 100 and 150, it should have been 56 cents, in which case it was underpaid and not caught. So probably, my guess is that it probably was the second instance that it was an overweight letter and they just slapped on what they thought was appropriate postage. And at Milton, the post office didn't weigh it, didn't catch it, and it just got through without any thing. But you have some examples of franking of the Parliament, the 17-cent Parliament, and the 5-cent Floral series. So that is a nice mixture of that franking. Here's another thing you can collect, and that is booklet stamps used on cover. Booklets have been around for a long time. They started, I don't know if they had them in the Victorian era, but I believe they had booklets in Edward VII, and then throughout the history of our postal services, they've sold stamps via booklets. And so they did in the 1980s with these maple leaf designs. They're not fancy stamps or anything, but it's always fun to get the lower value things, because those booklets were sold in vending machines for 50 cents, and they'd have one 30-cent stamp that was the first class rate at the time. And then they'd have a couple of 10s and a couple of 5s to make up 50 cents. So when you put your 2 quarters in those machines, the 50-cent booklet would come out, and people would have to get creative to figure out how to use those 10 and 5-cent stamps that didn't pay any rate. And sometimes you find them where they have them s'étonnant, like this upper one. The lower one, it doesn't have them s'étonnant, but it is, well, yeah, actually the 5 and 10 there. So this one has a pair of 5s and 2 10s to make up the 30-cent rate. And this one has 4 5s and 1 10. So that means it came from a couple of different booklets. But anyways, these are fun covers to get. They're not, I wouldn't call them rare, but they are scarce, those usages of the lower value booklet stamps. And whenever I see one, I grab it, and they don't generally cost me a lot of money. Okay, registration. That's another fun thing to go collect in view of rates and also routing. When you get a registered cover, there's often a really good routing history, and this one has that on the back, which I'll show in a minute. So this was mailed from Huntington, Quebec, which is a little town in the southwest corner of Quebec. I'll show you a map in a minute to show you where it is and how that thing was routed. And it was going to Brantford, Canada. So it's franked $2.44, which is made up of a double weight rate, 48 cents, which was the second step for 50 to 100 grams letter, and registration fee of $1.96. And these rates are all listed in that book by Andrew Chung and company. Very, very, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to figure out how the rates are constructed. So that's a fun part of hunting for discovering what the covers are all about. And you find that the post office very often gets it correct, as it did in this. And you've got some mixed franking here with the 4-cent floral and the 20-cent artifacts and the $2 National Parks issue. It's a nice combination of different issues put together on one cover to make the $2.44. And when you look at the back, there's 5 postmarks there which show the exact routing of the letter, going from Valleyfield, from Huntington to Valleyfield to Montreal. It was 30th of December, so they probably missed the cutoff for leaving Montreal before New Year, and was held over in the 3rd of January in 1984. Service resumed after things opened up after the New Year, and it was sent onwards and got to Brantford probably via Toronto 2 days later in January 5th. So you have a nice showing of how the thing was routed. And here's the map. This is where Huntington is, and it's in a corner of Quebec that's a little bit inaccessible. If you want to go to Ontario from there, you have to go either all the way back to Montreal, or you can go up Valleyfield, and there's a bridge there that goes across, and you can go back towards Toronto that way. The way the post office routed it, it was from Huntington to Valleyfield to Montreal, and then from Montreal it would have gone by a truck or maybe a train to Toronto and then onwards to Brantford. So a little bit of geography there. All right, here's a letter or a postcard mailed to California from Vancouver during Expo 86. I had the pleasure of being able to go to Vancouver in 1986. It was on a business trip, but I knew that the World's Fair Vancouver 86 was on, and I spent an extra day on my I took a day off from my business travel and went to the fair, and it was fabulous. It was really good. So this thing brought back memories. The lady who sent it, Aunt Robin, probably sending it to some nephews and nieces, saying hello from Expo 86 and having a great time, and referring to some, this card is from a people who are very like Eskimos. See you soon. So it's a fun social piece of social history. And the franking, 39 cents is the correct rate for that time in 1986. And it was made up of a booklet, soutenant, so that's beautiful. They kept the stamps together. And she probably bought that booklet at they had those machines at a lot of public locations. And they also had the rates shown on the machine. So she would have seen that it's 39 cents. And she'd rip out the 5 and 34-cent stamps, and she'd be left with a bunch of twos, 1 5 and 3 2s that would have made up the 50 cents. So we don't know what happened to that. But to have a soutenant modern franking, correct rate in period is a beautiful thing. This is the last one I'm going to be showing, and this is the one going to Doha, Qatar. So you've got a very exotic destination. This was mailed in 1989. So this booklet is the 50-cent vending machine booklet from 1987. So this is a bit out of date from the period. So it might have been a stamp collector who had this, or it might have been a general post office customer who just had an old booklet lying around and had a letter to mail to Qatar. These were the definitives in effect at the time, those wildlife definitives. That's a beautiful set, which I have spoken about earlier. It's a very complex set, and I love that set of definitives. So you have a combination of those and the 50-cent booklet and 26 cents making up the first step airmail rate in 1989. But definitely the best feature of this is that it's going to Qatar. It's an exotic place, and you don't find a lot of mail going to those. So that's the beauty of collecting modern postal history. You can cover all the bases of side interests like airmail, postage due, and you can cover the thing of destinations and rates and routing. And you can throw in a lot of social history and political history if you want, and have fun with that aspect of it. So thank you for listening. I'm open for questions, and hope that I've inspired some people to start collecting modern Canadian postal history.
This is a 40-year study that I have been doing, and it's a mystery chop, and you can see the chop on the right. It's a circular chop, and it's got an anchor in the center, and it seems to have 2 laurel leaves branches around the edges, and either an S or maybe a rope around the stem of the anchor. And recently, in June of this year, I acquired this addition to my collection. Now, it may be a bit hard to see, but if in your mind you go back to the previous image, it is. You can very well see the laurel leaf here, and here's the pointy ends of the anchor that goes up here in the S, the other laurel leaf on a Bangkok issue. Interestingly enough, I'm still waiting for this to arrive. It's caught up in some sort of COVID backlog of mail, but I have an image. And what I've been trying to do is figure out exactly what this chop is. The ones shown here are examples from my collection that I have picked up over the years. And then there's many others that I have seen in websites and collections and that sort of thing on the internet and in various other places. It appears mostly on Bangkok B overprints, but I did see this particular example here on the straight settlements. Straight settlement stamps could be used at Bangkok without the B. I bid on this, but seeing that I have to live somewhere and eat, I had to stop and somebody else got it. So I'm still looking for one, but it's a lovely, it's almost 98% complete. So it's a circular chop, 18 millimeters in diameter. Like I said, it's an anchor and looks like there's a rope or maybe an S there. And around the periphery, there's these laurel leaves. And it's this type of symbolism is often used as a maritime symbol. And here's a bunch of buttons that I found images of various places on the internet. Buttons for naval uniforms and uniforms of various steamship companies and that sort of thing. And there's the same symbolism. So there's no question that it's a maritime type symbol. There's even these badges and that sort of thing, Canadian Navy, American Navy and Russian Navy, and probably many other navies using the same thing. So yeah, it is maritime. And more recently, this was an item from the Hong Kong Study Circle competitions. This is a British Admiralty chop. Here's one from a French steamship company of some sort. And here's even a Dutch one, all the same thing. So more and more, I'm convinced that it's a maritime chop. I've seen 36 examples so far, but not one on cover. Now, Bangkok covers in my study, I've identified something like 140 covers that have appeared in collections and various auctions of covers out of Bangkok, but not one of them has had one of these stamps with this chop on it. 36 are Bangkok, 1 straight settlements, as we saw. 5 are canceled. Only 5 of the 36 are actually canceled, either with Singapore or with this checkerboard. The colors, I don't know if the colors are meaningful, but whoever was using them didn't limit itself to black. And there's 5 of these chops that are German companies operating in Bangkok, which I think is significant. Here's the checkerboard cancel, and here it is on a stamp. It's hard to see, but it's on there. And here's that straight settlement stamp again. So what do I think? From my study of the firms in Bangkok during that period of 1882 to 1885 that used the Bangkok Bs or straight settlement stamps, one stands out. It's called Pick and Pack Thives and Company. They were German merchants with an office in Hamburg. They owned 2 ships. So possibly they were running the ships from Bangkok to Singapore and elsewhere and making it possible to carry mail. They were agents for a German shipping company out of Hamburg, so that plays more into it. And they may have operated a service where you would hand in your letters, pay a fee, or you had an account with them. And they say, okay, we'll get your letters down to Singapore into the international operating postal system. So that's it, just showing that, you know, it may take a long, long time to find your answer, but I'm still looking.